the efficiency of the pre-modern psychiatric practices or evaluate contemporary methods, but rather it illustrates early approaches to describing brain disorders that may diverge from current understandings of biological and psychological functions of the human body and psyche.
Excuse me, Ms. Leena, sorry to interrupt you. Can you wait 2 minutes? I'll make my co-host, so we can enter the new people without disrupting the presentation.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you.
You can also remove the...
Sorry, what did you say?
So you can also just remove the...
Yeah, that's, we've been told not to do that. Salah, can you check if you're a co-moderator now? Okay. Thank you so much. You can continue.
Okay. Let's see. I believe I was talking about, so there's inherent differences between Ibn-Sina's diagnostic approaches and the DSM-5 with respect to their categorization of mental disorders. Since the main goal of the DSM-5 is to serve as a guide for professionals to help diagnose certain mental conditions, the manual assumes an approach that categorizes and describes the clusters of symptoms associated with mental disorders. However, the DSM-5 does not address the etiology or the possible treatment plan for any of the disorders that it describes. On the other hand, for every brain disorder that Ibn-Sina included in his canon of medicine, he provided a general overview of the disorder, its etiology, the associated signs and symptoms, as well as a treatment plan. So he really did approach mental illnesses and disorders from a holistic mindset. Now delving into Ibn-Sina's contributions to our modern view of psychosis. So the DSM-5 has 5 criteria for psychotic disorders, including delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thinking, grossly disorganized motor behavior, and negative symptoms. And the various combinations of these symptoms manifesting in a patient can be described by a variety of diagnoses, depending on the constellation of symptoms present. The current diagnosis of psychosis requires at least one of the 5 criteria. However, these criteria change periodically. In the canon of medicine, Ibn-Sina dedicated a section to diseases of the brain and their harmful consequences. And under his chapter on diseases of the mind, he described 3 categories of brain disorders: memory disorders, thinking disorders, and imagination disorders. We'll be comparing those 3 sections of the canon of medicine and the DSM-5. So first, the thinking disorders, or how Ibn-Sina termed it in Arabic, fasad al-fikr. So Ibn-Sina's category for thinking disorders entailed disorganized thinking and speech, and as well as behavioral disturbance. And Ibn-Sina explained that a patient with fasad al-fikr has poor speech, likes abnormal things, and asks for, and engages in inappropriate actions. This explanation by Ibn-Sina can be directly compared to the DSM-5 assertion that a patient with disorganized thinking and speech or formal thought disorder could demonstrate, quote, speech so severely disorganized that it is nearly incomprehensible and resembles receptive aphasia in its linguistic disorganization, end quote. Ibn-Sina's description of patients with fasad al-fikr who say things that are conceptually inappropriate also resembles the DSM-5's features of disorganized thinking and speech, as well as formal thought disorder of tangentiality, a symptom characterized by a patient providing answers to questions that are not completely related. Finally, Ibn-Sina's description of the patients liking abnormal things and engaging in inappropriate actions is similar to the symptoms of disorganized behavior and childlike silliness that's linked to psychosis as found in the DSM-5. The second parallel I'll be drawing between Ibn-Sina as well as the DSM-5's categorization of psychosis is the imagination disorders, or as termed by Ibn-Sina in Arabic, fasad al-takhayyul. So fasad al-takhayyul, or imagination disorders, shares symptoms resembling some current criteria of psychosis, namely hallucinations, disorganized thinking, and the disruption of other cognitive functions. Ibn-Sina described that patients with an imagination disorder see or hear things that do not exist in the real world and lack the abilities to conceptualize abstract meanings and to interpret ideas. According to Ibn-Sina, patients with an imagination disorder also cannot dream, and if they do, they forget their dreams rapidly. This is similar to the current formal thought disorder criterion of psychosis, a criterion categorized by disorganized speech that results from disorganized thinking. And the last parallel that we'll be drawing, inshallah, between Ibn-Sina as well as the DSM-5 is melancholia versus, or melancholia as employed by Ibn-Sina versus melancholia as is in the DSM-5. So the term melancholia as employed by Ibn-Sina cannot be directly translated to melancholia in the DSM-5 because the two terms indicate two different mental conditions. Melancholia, according to the DSM-5, is a specifier of depressive disorders marked with a depressed mood and a lack of pleasure in most or all activities. And Ibn-Sina described melancholia as a multi-system disorder affecting different body organs as well as the brain. Therefore, he listed various symptoms that usually begin with irrational suspiciousness, isolation, needless fear, tinnitus with psychomotor agitation, and trembling. With the prolongation of illness, the patient exhibits a disturbed, sad, and depressed mood. Consequently, the patient becomes more suspicious and easily panicked with irrational fears, exhibits incoherent speech and disorganized thinking, and gets bizarre ideas. This description illustrates how Ibn-Sina considered melancholia as a depressive disorder with prominent psychotic symptoms, including delusions. Furthermore, Ibn-Sina recognized that when melancholia became more severe with impulsivity and easily triggered anger, then there was a conversion to mania. And according to Ibn-Sina, patients experiencing mania exhibited irritability, aggression, suspicion, incoherent speech, inappropriate behavior, and laughing without a cause. Now, this is fascinating because Ibn-Sina may have been one of the first scholars to address that mood disorders exist as a spectrum, and one of the first to document that anger is often a transitional state from melancholic depression to mania, an assertion that's often credited to the French psychiatrist Jean-Pierre Falret, who lived during the 19th century and who expounded the switch phenomenon, in which a switch can occur between manic excitement and depression. Now, while Ibn-Sina did not diagnose psychosis as an independent mental disorder, his treatment of a patient, more specifically a prince, who can be regarded by modern practitioners as a patient with psychosis, can showcase Ibn-Sina's advanced treatment methods. And so who is this prince? So the prince that Ibn-Sina treated was suffering from delusions and believed that he was shapeshifting into a cow. He would constantly tell his advisors to slaughter him and was distressed that no one was killing him, so he stopped eating for days. Many physicians attempted to treat this prince, but were met with no success. Ibn-Sina agreed to treat the prince and arrived at the prince's home with a knife in his hand and asked, "Where is the cow so I can slaughter it?" Ibn-Sina acted as though he was about to slaughter the prince, but then told the prince that he was not fat enough to be slaughtered and that he needs to eat more first. This caused the prince to eat more food and take the medicine prescribed by Ibn-Sina. Because of Ibn-Sina's treatment, the man was treated after 1 month without any of the delusions that he had been experiencing in the month prior. So what are the takeaway of this case study? The first and most important takeaway is really recognizing Ibn-Sina's patient-centered treatment plan. Instead of trying to convince the prince that he's a human and not a cow, Ibn-Sina focused on making sure that the prince was comforted and that he was treated well. He also gained the prince's trust by carefully refraining from invalidating the prince's perspective and experiences. And this trust was a crucial component of the treatment course because without the trust, the patient would likely not have eaten or taken the medication that eventually cured him. And while it's unclear what medicine Ibn-Sina prescribed for the prince, it's highly probable that Ibn-Sina gave him camphor, an oil that was often used by Ibn-Sina and was actually first popularized by him because of its ability to help patients with psychotic symptoms. Now we know, after much research done in the 17th century in Europe, that camphor actually is a widely accepted herbal form that can alleviate mental illness such as psychosis and mania. And so what the usage of camphor really emphasizes is the power of non-Western or non-traditional forms of medicine and their impacts on patients with psychiatric conditions. And this really begs the question whether a non-psychiatric remedy can meaningfully improve a patient's quality of life and prognosis for their mental illness. As a lesson learned from Ibn-Sina's case study, it may be beneficial to keep this in mind as modern-day clinicians research and create a treatment plan for their patients. So reflections. So as we've seen today, Ibn-Sina is often not credited for a lot of his great contributions. However, he has contributed a lot to the field of psychiatry at large, and the parallels that can be drawn between his categorization of many symptoms of psychosis and the DSM-5's modern characterization of psychosis is uncanny. I'd love to hear any questions that you guys have, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any questions in the audience? We have paper if you want to write it down so you can remember it for afterwards. And if you have questions in the chat or comments, we do have some comments, but we'll read them out loud at the end of the presentations, inshallah. Thank you. We're gonna stop screen sharing.
Yeah, she's not here. No. So our next presenter is Dr.
Alia Azmat. Dr. Alia Azmat is a counseling psychologist. She's currently a postdoc fellow at Anna Trad and Associates in Georgia, and she will be speaking here with us today. Thank you. Please welcome our next speaker, Dr. Alia Azmat.
Here or?
Oh no, there we go.
Yeah.
That's good. Thanks.
Welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Dr. Alia Azmat. I just graduated in August with my PhD in counseling psych. I am currently getting postdoc hours at the Center for Victims of Torture in Clarkston, Georgia, as well as doing private practice in Atlanta. Today I'm going to be talking about relational cultural theory and healing with Muslim clients. A little bit about what today's going to look like, just really briefly. I'll tell you a little bit about why I thought this was an important topic to discuss, the tenets of RTC, and then how I've applied this with some of the client work that I've done. And the reason, well, here. So the two gaps that I saw, just in terms of RCT and my clinical work, is that I've heard of relational cultural theory, and I really, thank you. I've really connected with the theory because basically the theory of distress is that isolation is what causes suffering in people. The theory is also was started by a group of women, and the theory also has some neurobiological support around how social exclusion impacts the brain and impacts relationships. So relational cultural theory has been used to work on a bunch of different things, including depression, trauma, eating disorders, relationships, and then addressing issues like sexism, racism, and classism. So what I also really like about the theory is that there is an attendance to us being interconnected with each other, with the world, with even nature and things of that sort. And so that sort of way of being is a way that I've really appreciated, but is difficult to find interventions around. So there's the book, if anyone's interested in buying a book about relational cultural theory, but even all of the presentations that I've gone to around this method or modality don't really show you how to do it. It's really meant to be a way of being, but I think that as a young clinician, that can sometimes be difficult. Like, what do I do? How do I do it? How do I make sure I'm doing it right? The other gap that I saw in my clinical training, particularly on internship, which is the first time that I actually was able to meet with Muslim clients. So that was the first time that I was able to work with, in a clinical setting, individuals who look like me, practice like me, or identify similarly to me. And that brought up some really unique challenges that also was, I think, undersold in my training. There's an assumption that, maybe you're a blank slate, or if you are trained in the interpersonal sort of modality, the way that I was, you can use the relationship, you can use your positionality, but there really isn't a lot of space outside of the multicultural classroom to say this is how to work with different people, rather than sometimes different people are within your community, and sometimes difference doesn't look the same even within the community. So those are the two different elements that I'm really trying to frame in this conversation or in this talk, about what it looks like to practice RTC or from an RTC framework, and then also what it means to work with folks that have similar identities as you. Just really briefly, I can pass around the book if you would like, but these are the tenets of RCT. There's some basic assumptions, basically that people grow through and toward relationship throughout the lifespan, that there's a movement towards mutuality rather than separation, that the ability to participate in more complex and diversified relational networks is what characterizes psychological growth. Mutual empathy and mutual empowerment are at the core of this sort of framework, and that authenticity is necessary for growing in relationships. And there's also this idea of 5 quote unquote good things, which is zest, clarity, sense of worth, sense of productivity, and a desire for more connection. So I'm really not going to spend too much time on these tenets because I also find them kind of unhelpful, besides just framing what it means to be relational in clinical work. So the few definitions that I will give that are pulled from the book are mutual empathy, connection, and disconnection, really, shame, and relational images. And then there's also this idea of power over in the clinical setting. And so I'll start with mutual empathy, which is really just being open to being affected by and affecting another person. So both people in this dynamic and per this theory move towards a sense of mutual respect. They have an intention to grow together, and there's an increased capacity for connectedness. I think often there's empathy given towards the client, and there is less emphasis on also receiving empathy or being moved. So I remember in my training having this question of like, am I allowed to say that I feel love for my clients? Why does this feel so taboo? But I do feel love for my clients. And that what I appreciate about this notion of mutual empathy is that I'm allowed to say that I'm impacted in these specific ways by the people that I work with. And then I'm just going to continue to move on, but the quote is there for folks that would like to read it. So yeah, this is really just highlighting that I empathize with you and I'm letting you know that I see your pain and your pain has actually affected me in XYZ way. The next sort of concept in this theory is connection and disconnection, which is a really large part of this way of doing therapy. And what I really appreciate about this is that disconnection in relational cultural theory is seen as normative and inevitable. So there will be times in relationships where people maybe feel misunderstood or invalidated. And that it's that sort of holding of the disconnection and the processing of the disconnection that can facilitate healing within the clinical space. So they describe disconnections as either being acute, chronic, or traumatic. And then they also talk about how disconnection is related to power and related to some of the other sort of concepts that I'm going to be coming to, which is if a less powerful person is not allowed or encouraged to voice out their anger or hurt, the person will learn to suppress that aspect of their experience and may move into hiding or inauthenticity to stay in the relationship. So this again really attends to the ways in which our positionality in the clinical room can be needs to be attended to in terms of how we're talking about power, and also how we are addressing when we have potentially hurt or created a rupture with our clients. The next sort of concept is controlling images and shame. And shame occurs when someone feels like they're no longer worthy of empathy or love. And this is actually pulled from my dissertation, but there's a critique of unconditional positive regard by this author named Khadija, which says that unconditional positive regard in the Rogerian sense doesn't always attend to how worth is often gendered and racialized. And so the theory, per relational cultural theory, attends to this. It says that controlling images are the stereotypes that hold people in place or have, I guess, they're the stereotypes that we sometimes internalize even about ourselves, and those are based in societal norms and societal narratives. And this is really coming from Black feminist thought around what it means to be racialized, gendered, and then also including sexual orientation and that around how the dominant group will describe a person or a narrative around of a person and how that can impact folks and marginalize folks. And so that's the next concept. I'm just breezing through these so I can get to the intervention part. And then the final one before power over is relational images. And this can be seen or thought about as the internal relational schemas that we have about folks. So typically, that's how you see your parent or how you see siblings. What I've seen in my work with other Muslim clients is how they perceive me, how they perceive my Muslimness, how they assume maybe parts of my Muslimness, and then also how they see me in terms of a South Asian. So I think that there is definitely folks who have feelings about what does it mean to share with me because I'm a South Asian woman, and how is it being received that I'm sharing vulnerably given my identities and given their identities. And so these are obviously developed in early life, and RCT suggests that exploring and unpacking these relational images is a part of what healing can look like. And then finally, there's this concept of power over and power with. And so what RTC says about power over is that it's a concept that folks use to feel safe in terms of exercising power over others and keeping folks in a less advantaged position. And so they offer this idea of power with, where more can be accomplished through collaborative efforts than hierarchical arrangements. Okay, so time for the interventions. The first one is related to an idea of mutual empathy. And so I have talked about in supervision this idea of an empathy entryway and an empathy gap. And as basic maybe as having empathy for a client is, I think it's really important, particularly from an RCT lens, to notice where you can connect and really own the shared experience with a client, particularly if their story is feeling very similar to yours, and then where there's a gap. Where are there places in the story where you're maybe saying, I really just want, I want them to get over this. I've been there, and it's not that bad, right? Because that is a way of minimizing and then also not offering empathy in those moments. I think that's also an entryway in terms of practicing self-empathy as a clinician to then model to clients. So this is a super basic sort of way to put language to what might be happening in the room between a Muslim and Muslim dyad. The other intervention, I guess, that I've used is attending to this idea of how can we acknowledge differences within the ways that we've been socialized as Muslims, whether that's Muslim man, a Muslim woman client. So I've done this with one of my Muslim women clients, and I call it the good Muslim woman should activity, because there are lots of shoulds, and shoulds, as we know, are connected to shame, and shame is a large concept in RCT. So what does this mean? This means that we were doing Zoom therapy only internship year. So this means I pull up a slide on Google Drive and I say, okay, you're gonna spend some time thinking about all the shoulds that were put onto you from your parents, from your siblings, from your, if you're in grad school friends, from your undergrad friends, community members, society, okay? So you're gonna spend some time, 5-10 minutes doing that. I'm gonna spend some time and really modeling, who I am in the room, but also modeling this vulnerability of both of us have different shoulds that we have maybe we're still working through. And in this particular activity, the client that I was working with, the way in which we were different was I had said, my parents said you should only rely on God. That was like a really big narrative for me growing up. And for her, it was you should only rely on us. Your friends will not be there for you. Your Muslim friends, even if they're Muslim friends, they're not going to be there for you. Your non-Muslim friends definitely won't be there for you. And so that actually created more empathy. And that was a gap that I didn't notice that I had between the two of us, where she had really internalized this idea of if I don't rely on my parents or if I say no to them, it is catastrophic, rather than this connection with God or this connection with her own sense of intuition and trust, perhaps. So this is I think a really effective intervention, but it also requires quite a bit of vulnerability from the clinician. But if you're coming from an RCT sort of standpoint, it's something to consider. It's also a way to normalize, again, disconnection, right? So we're both Muslim women, okay? But you are maybe a different racial identity than I am. So where are there gaps, and where is it okay for us to be in community, but also acknowledge the ways in which there is disconnection between us? Another intervention sort of related to this is the notion of self-silencing. So in the concept that I had described earlier around folks going inward and hiding and feeling inauthentic in relationships, there's research on that. It's called self-silencing, and there's 4 different subscales. And I've actually done some research with American Muslim women with this scale. And so I have a client right now who is a mom and who is working through her story as well as parental dynamics. And when I gave her this language of self-silencing, she like really ran with it. I gave her the article. She was like, I read the whole article. I put notes on it. She's like, it was really validating for her to have language around what was happening in her relationships. And then to say, how am I going to make different choices around how I show up in relationships? Why am I making these choices? Why am I maybe self-betraying in these ways? And so the subscales of this this concept is external self-perception, which I perceive as affective and related to judgment. If you take a more CBT model, I think that there's a way to work this into the CBT model as well, right? So care is self-sacrifice. So this is a cognitive belief that caretaking means that you must self-sacrifice. Silencing of the self. This is again a cognitive belief that you have to devalue your own voice in relationships to exist in relationships. And then the divided self, where there is maybe you're putting something out, you're putting joy out, but maybe feeling anger inside. And so that's an affective, again. So if you're doing thoughts and feelings, this is a way to kind of think about that as well. And then if you wanted to continue that, you could also say there's, there's evidence for self-silencing and self-objectification being related to depression in Muslim women, which is also a cognitive and affective body shame and body surveillance construct. There's also this notion of community silence, which I discuss here, which is, what does it mean that the community or many communities that happen to be Muslim don't talk about sex, or maybe don't talk about it in a way that always feels great, don't often talk about suicide. There's stigma and there's spiritual doubt. I really like the SSS situation. So, and then Dr. Shaban Amir talks about Muslim women on campus and the ways in which identity is negotiated through drinking, through how folks dress and dating. And so these are anonymized and inspired by clients, but these are thoughts that have come up and dynamics which have come up. So I had a Muslim male client share that he was exploring his sexuality and that maybe he was bisexual. And he said, I just don't think a South Asian Muslim woman would ever accept me. And I said, oh, that's interesting that you think that, because do you think I think that about you? And we were able to work through what that meant for him to be seen by me in that way, to be held by me, and then the assumption that he made around how I would respond to that disclosure. So there's the sexuality element there. There's the suicide element, which I've heard as, I really don't want to have these, I don't want to have ideation. I feel so ashamed around having ideation and having to really normalize that, the stigma of I'm here because I need to be fixed. And so really some education and mental health education around what it means to be seeing a therapist, and that you're not broken, but we're working together to be in relationship and be connected. Spirituality. I have a client who has shared with me that their brother is no longer Muslim. And again, a lot of shame around that because they know, I want to say perceive, but I believe them when they say that the community impact of that is going to be treacherous. And what does it mean that we can't talk about spiritual doubt? What does it mean that many Muslim men are leaving Islam, and that conversation is maybe not happening at all? Drinking. I talked to you all about my mom client. I found my daughter's fake ID, but we don't drink. Okay, what does it mean that you found a fake ID? What does it mean that maybe trust was broken? What would it mean if she did drink? How are we going to work through this relationship? Dress. This is really an Islamophobic comment that had happened with a client around my professor called me by the color of my scarf instead of my name, and that was a very dehumanizing experience. Being able to hold that. What does it mean to hold that as a Muslim clinician who doesn't wear hijab, but knows that this discrimination is occurring in the classroom? And what does it mean to empower the client to escalate that or not escalate that, and giving them choice around that? Oh, okay. I'm gonna quickly go through the rest of my slides now. Another intervention is that I really appreciated is from the book Islamically Integrated Psychotherapy. This is an article written by Farah Lodi, The Heart Method, Healthy Emotions Anchored by Rasulullah's Teachings. What I really want to honor here is thinking about secure attachment to God and how that manifests in the therapeutic relationship. The next one is also in the book Islamically Integrated Psychotherapy by Dr. Rabia Malik. And she talks about how folks in her experience are often putting the relational image of their parents onto God and separating the image of God with the image of parent, and how important that is and how very relevant that is to that relational image that I talked about in terms of RCT. And then here is another piece. I'm going to really speed through this, but basically there's an article that talks about transference and countertransference with intra-ethnic dialogues. So sometimes this can be seen as the form of, oh, you're so elevated in the community, so you're going to know how to solve this. And it's like, well, actually, some of this you got to solve on your own, but I can support you through it, right? So what does it mean to put yourself off the pedestal that many Muslim clients I've experienced put you on? Sometimes there's elements of this, like selling out, not wanting to work with a therapist because of the perhaps negative emotions or judgment towards this having a same race or same religious identity in the therapist, and then ambivalence. And then from therapist to client, it can be this idea of over-identifying or wanting to distance, not interrupting dysfunctional behavior because you really think that you're helping them beat the system, which isn't always helpful. So there's some unconscious collusion happening. And then anger and survivor's guilt around, what do I do? I'm hearing all of these stories. Okay, this is kind of the same. The final thing that I want to really address is more questions than interventions, but this notion of power over and what it means to be authentic and what it means to be authentically Muslim and who decides that, and what role Muslim clinicians have and non-Muslim clinicians have to access knowledge, and a variety of different knowledge around a variety of topics like abortion, domestic violence, end-of-life care, and how can we use these concepts in the therapeutic room to expand our ideas of what it means to be Muslim and who is Muslim. So I will just let you read over some of these questions that I ended up putting in my dissertation for you all to marinate on as a way to continue to think about what it means to be relational in our work and what it means to be relational in the interpretations of Islam that we consider authentic. Cool. And then some more questions if you guys want my slides to reflect on. And yeah, these are my references.
In the chat, we're also asking for the slides.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alia, for the presentation. So next presentation we have on the topic of an integrative solution to mindfulness for Muslims by Chaplain Yasin Dwyer and Humeyra Celebi. I'm sorry if I pronounced the name wrong. Humeyra, are you gonna present, or Chaplain Yasin will be presenting?
So I'll first start, inshallah, and at the end, Imam Yasin will have a small section where he'll present.
Sure. So let me make sure that both of you are co-hosts.
Okay.
Because I made you co-host, but yeah, I made him the co-host also. And can you share your screen so we'll be sure that you are good to go? And a little introduction about both of these. So Chaplain Yasin Dwyer is a lead chaplain and executive director of Muslim Chaplaincy of Toronto, advisor and voice. And then Humeyra Celebi is the co-founder and content team lead for RU. And she is also certified as a family and marriage counselor in Turkey. So thank you. It's up to you, Humeyra.
Okay. So you can see my screen fine, right? Which you checked. Okay. Awesome. Because I think I accidentally clicked something, so I wanted to make sure. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks for joining in.
Sorry to cut you off, Humeyra.
Yeah.
We have to double check this
Sure.
thing. Now, yes, all set.
Okay. All right. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim again. Thanks for joining in, everyone. I know that you've come to hear about an integrative solution to find mindfulness for Muslims. but I'd like to start with the problem because we need to know what this integrative solution is for. So let's take a look. Problem number one is, without a surprise, increased mental health issues. Studies show that there has been a substantial increase in the prevalence of mental health issues, such as anxiety and depression during the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a result, there's a higher increase, higher demand for mental health care, but the system unfortunately falls short of providing. And we know that there are some barriers to accessing mental health support due to geographical or financial limitations or stigma associated with mental health. So given this problem, how can we respond to it? One of the widely applied methods as a response is mindfulness. And with the accessibility issue at rise, mindfulness apps have become more popular. And you might ask, why mindfulness? And research responds to that question with, because it's been shown to be, to have beneficial effects in several areas like psychological or behavioral effects. And it might be because of marketing. Nonetheless, practicing mindfulness could help in developing tolerance, patience, empathy, gratitude, and other traits that that are part of Muslim morals, actually. And I'd like to actually take a note and add a note here that we need to be careful of the context with which mindfulness is practiced. And I can make a reference here to a presentation that was done in the morning, to Sister Dana's presentation, and strongly encourage you to take a look at that. Once it's uploaded on the YouTube channel, inshallah, in case you missed it. She explained the different paradigms of mindfulness there really well, including the Islam paradigm. So coming back to this presentation, apps that help improve mental well-being are great, but there still is a gap. And that gap is the lack of faith-based tools, which is problem number two. Yes, these apps or other mainstream mental health services or tools may have benefits, but we need to think about tailoring them to Muslims, because it's important to do so because spirituality and religion have implications for mental health practice. And for example, positive religious coping is associated with lower rates of depressive symptoms. Yet none of the popular mindfulness apps are faith sensitive. And a lot of our beta users mentioned this need. One user mentioned that a current solution like Headspace felt like it was missing something. And another user said that they've never tried a mindfulness app to begin with because they associate being mindful with their faith, and they haven't found an app that connects the two. So what do? We went over the effectiveness of mindfulness apps and the lack of faith-based resources or tools. So bringing the two yields the idea of a faith-based mindfulness app. But what is mindfulness? It's a really broad term and has several applications, like in Buddhism or secular context. So it's necessary to define it here. But simply put, mindfulness is cultivating presence, and it focuses on the here and now. And living in the now is in our Islamic tradition, because the past is no longer in our hands and we have no guarantee to reach the future. So our true lifespan is today, and we turn our focus to today, to here and now. And mindfulness in Islam has 6 major components or concepts, or the 6 T's to remember them easily. Tadabbur, tafakkur, tashakkur, tazkiyah. Oops, I did not. Tazkiyah, I was trying to say them from memory. Tasabbur, and taqwa. And if I miss any, you see it on slides. So I invite you to explore each of them, or perhaps like pick 3 words that resonate with you the most. And you just saw that the 3 most that resonate with me are tafakkur, tashakkur, and taqwa, in case you were curious. Okay, so the purpose of our current work is to provide an integrative solution to contemplation using an Islamic psychology framework in a smartphone app. So merging Islamic psychology with technology. And how do we plan to do that? Well, let's first quickly remember the 3 approaches to Islamic psychology. The first approach is the comparison approach, which is when we compare Western psychological concepts and their assumed equivalents in Islamic sources. This approach intends to find a common ground with mainstream psychology, but there could be a drawback to it because it could impoverish Islamic concepts to meet the definition of a Western psychological concept. And it also doesn't align with, for example, Dr. Malik Badri's approach. May Allah have mercy on him. So to summarize, of course, we don't want to impoverish Islamic concepts. Why impoverish something so rich that we can benefit from? So we want to avoid that one. And the second approach is the Islamic filter, which attempts to develop an Islamic perspective on Western psychological concepts. It's like take the good and leave the bad of Western psychology, from my understanding. And the third approach conceptualizes Islamic psychology as being derived from Islamic sources. So the primary sources and secondary sources like the Quran, prophetic tradition, works of early Muslim scholars. And so what is the Ruh's current application or approach? It's a mixture of second and third approach that you see here, but we aspire to fully embrace the third approach, inshallah. And so to be more specific, right now we're using the traditional Islamically integrated psychotherapy model as our framework. So you see a complex mechanism of change is at play here. We started with integrating tafakkur or contemplation interventions, which target the cognition, and also dhikr, so mostly targeting the ruh. But because all aspects of the self are linked with one another, while we feed one, we also feed the other. For example, with dhikr, we know that with the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. So dhikr is the remembrance of Allah as well, a form of remembrance. And so with that intervention, we can inshallah target those areas as well. So we're striving to support the users in developing a contemplative mind and a sound heart, along with increasing our angelic qualities, improving our emotional regulation, and attaining a tranquil ego, inshallah. And before I move on, I would like to put out a disclaimer here that this is not the application of the TIP model that we're doing. It's an application from what we can understand and what we can apply. We're also seeking ways to improve ourselves and learn further. So just a disclaimer. Okay, so with these in mind, we've developed several series so far. There's relieving stress, navigating hopelessness, which is intended to help those struggling with suicidal ideation. And conquering porn addiction, which is an unfortunate but real issue in the Muslim community. And if you've noticed the emotion screen here at the bottom, good job. But why is it there? So when you come to the app, we ask the users to do an emotional check-in. And this serves 2 purposes. One, we can better curate content for them. Whatever they need based on their emotional state, we provide them with that. And 2, we can help them become more aware of their emotions. Because if we can identify our emotions, we can manage them or regulate them better and seek the remedies for it. So, you know, there is emotional regulation as one of the outcomes that we're desiring. And here you can see some sample contemplation sessions from the Relieving Stress series. There is psychoeducation, helpful exercises such as breathing, and most importantly, contemplation incorporated into these sessions. And the ones on the screen are just a few of the sessions included in this series. More to come, inshallah. Some results I can share today are that more than 500 beta users have subscribed to the Ruh app. And so there is an amazing amount of support from the community, which justifies the need for such a solution, such a tool. We've also received positive feedback from mental health professionals, and we're partnering up with experts to build content in their areas of expertise. And after trying a few sessions, our beta users have said that they've felt a renewed purpose and more connected with Allah, which is one of our ultimate goals, to connect our users with Allah. It's important to mention that Ruh is not meant to replace professional help. And at any time we can, we strongly encourage our users to seek professional help if they need to. And because, I mean, live administration of the TIP framework or psychotherapy by mental health professionals, you know, ensures a more personalized and effective treatment for Muslim clients. So with all means, by all means, if you can find a trusted mental health professional, inshallah, may Allah increase their numbers. But nonetheless, a digital solution or a tool like Ruh can be used as a preventative measure. First of all, you know, you might be in a happy state, but you'd like to increase your, you know, happy state, or you'd like whatever, you know, that preventative measure. I guess that let's leave it there. That so that they can preserve the state that they're in, increase in positive aspects and so on, and it can support active clients that are seeking professional help at the moment, like the therapists can recommend their clients to use a tool like Ruh outside of the therapy session to help with their progress of mental health progress, inshallah. And it can support, you know, users who do not seek professional help, whether it be because they're not able to or they choose not to. Hopefully, if they need to, they choose to. And I guess there's an added bonus here, which is, you know, the accessibility of such a tool leads to more exposure, which leads to the reduction of stigma around mental health. Okay. So limitations, there are some challenges associated with this line of work, especially having no established example in front of us in terms of an Islamic psychology-based technology solution. It's definitely a challenge, but with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and experts in the Muslim mental health field, we inshallah hope to make this a success. And on that note, if you'd like to be a part of this initiative, please reach out. We'd be happy to connect, inshallah. Before I pass it over to Imam Yasin, the voice of our app, I'd like to thank my teammates for their support. And Imam Yasin, we're over to you.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. In the name of Allah, most compassionate, most merciful, all praise and all thanks belongs to Allah, and we ask Allah to shower His peace and His blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad, who is called Rahmatan lil Alameen, a mercy to all of the worlds, his family, his companions, and the righteous everywhere. I greet you, my dear brothers, sisters, and friends, with the greeting words of peace, the greeting words of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May God's peace, mercy, and blessings be with each and every one of you. As my dear sister Humeyra mentioned, I have joined the Ruh app team to act as the narrative voice So we thought it would be of some benefit to go through an example of what you may find on the Ruh app. And for this narrative example, I'm just going to turn off my camera so that we can pay attention to the narration and perhaps taste some of the sweetness of what will be shared. In Surah Al-Fatiha, we begin with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. As you begin listening to this session, say slowly with your heart present in each word, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, preparing your heart to learn about Him, Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, most glorified and exalted. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. This chapter, Surah Al-Fatiha, takes us through a journey of knowing Allah as He wants to be known. And in 7 short verses, the names Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim are mentioned twice. And so these names deserve our special focus and attention. Pause for a moment to think about these questions. What is mercy? What is mercy for the one expressing it? And what is mercy for the one receiving it? To answer these questions, visualize this. A battle takes place and ends. There are prisoners. But there is a woman who has lost her child. She is looking for him frantically. The anxiety, the fear, and the desperation are apparent as her eyes scan the battlefield, her body moving from place to place. Suddenly, she finds him. In a single moment, all the previous emotions dissipate. She embraces her child and holds him close with an outpouring of love, relief, and mercy. The child, too, after being bewildered, separated, and lost, is comforted, safe, and assured. This is a real scene that happened before Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the honored companions. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, Allah is more merciful to his servants than this woman is to her child. So rahmah is tenderness, kindness, mercy, and love. Allah is Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman tells us that his mercy is intense and overflowing. Ar-Rahim tells us that this mercy is not a momentary state, but rather a permanent attribute. Visualize again the scene with the mother searching for her child. Now put yourself in the place of that child. How comforted would you feel by that outpouring of mercy? How safe would you feel in the presence of the one showing you mercy? And how assured would you be that this mercy is not fleeting, but permanent? The mercy Allah has shown you is more. What we have described reflects a fraction of 1% of God's mercy. So close your eyes and reflect on moments of kindness in your life, both the overt and what you appreciated later on. Maybe it was the smile of a stranger when you were feeling down. Perhaps a friend calling you when you needed it most, or a family member comforting you in dark times. It could be you looking back on a hardship and realizing what a blessing and mercy it was. It may even be your heart filling with love as you pray to Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim in the middle of the night. Let this reflection soften your heart and be a means for you to turn to Him. Let that mercy you are a recipient of be reflected in your mercy towards others. And remember that recitation of His book begins, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us, guide us, and keep us all in His loving care. And may He plant the seed of mercy within our hearts and allow that seed to germinate, to grow, and produce the fruits of faith and certainty wherever we may be. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
So that was just a sample of the many sessions that you could find in our app. If you'd like to hear more, you can download the app for Apple users through that QR code, and you can also find it on Google Play. And for any questions or thoughts or feedback, please reach out to me through this email. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Amber Huck. Dr. Amber Huck earned his PhD in psychology from Western Michigan University and Master of Science in Clinical Psychology from Eastern Michigan University. Dr. Huck currently works as a faculty member at the Cambridge Muslim College, UK, and is the National Coordinator of Muslim Family Services, ICNA Relief USA.
I have 5 minutes.
No, 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Great. What a nice presentation last one was. All of them were great. I mean, there's a hadith that what you see in this world with regards to mercy is only Allah represents 1% of the mercy in this world, and He has kept to show the other 99% on the day of Qiyamah. SubhanAllah. So as Muslims, we are supposed to believe in all of this and when we make prayers with due diligence and seriousness, and Allah listens. So subhanallah, that was great. The presentation was Dr. Azmat was making. I was laughing as well as thinking about this, that what parents things parents say is that you should not work at non-profits. Now, I have seen people actually working in ICNA. My background was not working in the nonprofits. I never have. But when I came here, I thought of retiring or semi-retiring and write books, because that's what I like to do and teach at the university. So I still do. But when I joined ICNA Relief as the National Director for Muslim Family Services, I met families. It's very, very surprising that there are generations that are working in this humanitarian organizations. Grandfather, father, children, and grandchildren, either as volunteers or full-time. And I personally encourage my children to at least volunteer in organizations like this. But anyway, this is not like a very formal research paper, basically an overview of what ICNA Relief Services does, especially pertaining to the Muslim Family Services program. and pertaining to mental health, and especially during the COVID-19. So some of the data which I will share with you basically is, I cannot change the slides here. Let's see. Yeah, the arrows are not moving. They're moving from here. So I'm just going to give you a little background on what ICNA Relief is all about, and just the data that we have for the last year of 2021, and then especially the role of the Muslim Family Services, which I am currently leading for the country, and specifically on mental health and counseling. And obviously we run into challenges like many other organizations do, and some of the recommendations that I think will work and should work. So yeah, for those of you who are not familiar with the ICNA as an organization, which is the Islamic Council of North America, was founded to provide support, voice, and platform to the growing Muslim community back in 1968. And then in 1992, they came up with this wing, ICNA Relief, as a charitable wing of ICNA to do the humanitarian work abroad. And they expanded so much that in 1998, they had to split between ICNA Relief USA and then ICNA Relief Helping Hand. So what you see, Helping Hand and ICNA Relief both are actually from the same family. And Helping Hand works outside, overseas, and ICNA Relief is limited to doing the domestic work here in the US. And what we have seen in the last 20 years or 10 to 20 years is exponential growth, and preparing for what's ahead, including the mental health services. So they serve in 6 regions, Northeast, South Central, Western, Southeast, and Midwest, and 35 states, more than 600 cities right now is what they're serving in. I wanted to say like 100,000 volunteers, but not many in mental health because we don't have counselors as many. And over the years, they have also attained accreditations and partnerships. What you see here is from last year, and the progress they have made in the last quarter between January and March is also very fascinating. So we have added many new partnerships in the just last 3 months. The programs are at least 6. And what I'm going to talk about mainly is Muslim Family Services, but they have hunger prevention, disaster relief. All of these needs counseling, all of these needs mental health services, transitional housing, health services, and also back to school giveaway for children actually who stayed back and now are going back to the schools. So within the Muslim Family Services, there are 5 programs. Counseling refugee services is huge, huge. And with the onset of all these Afghan refugees coming into the country, we have like 3,000-4,000 refugees that ICNA Relief is now taking in to serve. Then we have community education. Then we have the foster advocacy training and education program and specialized pantries. And then, of course, during the COVID-19, there was this helpline that we came up with that serves the need of many Muslim, not just Muslims, but all people across the nation. Some of the data from last year, just within Muslim Family Services, number of refugees actually by the end of November that we had served last year was 50,000. And this year, only from January to March now, we have just taken about from Afghan refugees, not less than 3,000 to 4,000 to serve their complete needs, and also applied for as a resettlement agency. And in terms of volunteer hours, we had 5,000 plus volunteer hours for refugee services. And I will talk about counseling later, but for hunger prevention, 925,456 people served. So we're talking about 1 million people served with free food for the homeless mostly. And then obviously we had 97 foster and refugee children assisted within the FATE program. The burning issue right now is with the unaccompanied minors that actually are now among the Afghan refugees. So we have about, let's say, 400 unaccompanied minors in the shelters that need a foster home that isn't available right now for them to go. So this is another need that they're looking at. And the person who under my program serves the FADE program, she's saying that we need counselors to work with the children who are actually going through very hard times without their parents. It's a long story of how they became unaccompanied minors or orphans. I mean, you know how things are in Afghanistan. Yeah, so for the health services, just within 6 months within the health services program on COVID-19 vaccinations and outreach, about 300,000 people were reached through ICNA Relief Health Services. 897 vaccination events were held, and people vaccinated were more than 5,000 just from the ICNA Relief. We have one full-time clinic, 7 part-time clinics, and mobile clinics as well, and RVs all across the nation. Many new volunteers actually have joined ICNA Relief in 2021. This is just a sample on the right at the Shifa Clinic, which is a full-time clinic in South Carolina. And so there are student rotations from medical students, medical volunteers, and non-medical volunteers that we have. So actually, it is one of the very important departments that we have is making great progress. Again, within Muslim Family Services, I will go on to the next slide from here because that's where the latest numbers are of the services that we provided to the people. So for mental health and counseling, when I came, there were 8 states being served. So I added 3 more because I had contacts with counselors and universities. So we have 11 states now that are providing mental health counseling to the families, refugees, children, etc. Number of in 13 locations. Number of clients served last year, this is growing drastically this year as well, was more than 5,000, sessions held more than 6,000, hours of service more than 16,000, and total value of service more than $500,000. Keep this in mind that all this is free. Nobody actually charges the clients, mostly poor people come. Even those who are very rich, we don't charge them. They can donate money, but all the charges are free of cost. So as far as mental health services by state, we have from Arizona to Washington, the services that were started, I think initially was in Michigan in 1998. So we had a total of 9 counselors over the period of time, but there are only 2 remaining right now. The largest number of counselors serve in the California office, including the interns. We have about 34 in total, which is a big department. And many of them are non-Muslims as well. So we take interns and they are working to help many people who come in and have the need for the counseling services, especially during the COVID. So you can look at the years and as well as the credentials of the counselors. We have both master's level as well as doctoral level, and they're all licensed. These are paid counselors, so it's their job full-time. And this is also very encouraging that the universities are quite willing to send their students to get their internship training at these sites. And after I joined, I have talked with 3 universities, Antioch, which provides also a PsyD program, I believe they have, in different locations of the US. Arizona State and Georgia State University are ready to send their interns. And we also have through the CSPP, everybody is aware of that, CSP of Chicago, Concordia, California Southern, National University in Pepperdine. We have their students doing their internship in our programs, counseling programs. Type of services, obviously, mostly virtual during the COVID, individual, family, and group counseling for all these issues, including depression, anxiety, trauma, family issues, etc. Our counselors provided a lot of workshops during the last year and before, and support groups, and I'll give you some examples of what they have done over in the last 2 years in many of the different states. More female than males, and some counselors provided help in Islamic schools. So I'm saying here that not only there are mostly all female counselors, but also those who seek help are females. So we don't have data on why men don't come, or why there are not enough male counselors or mental health professionals for that matter. And yes, the issue of religious and faith-based counseling by imams is becoming very, very common and popular. The therapies used and the ethnicities served, ethnicities from Arabs to Afghans, Latinos, of African, African American, Hispanic, South Asian, South American, white, etc. Because all the services are free, so whoever needs the services, they come to us and they are actually seen for free. And insight-oriented, CBT, DBT, you name it, EMDR, biofeedback, because all these graduates are from the American schools and they have gone through all this training, so they are providing these services very heavily weighed on the cultural responsive framework. Also, they use the software tools for collecting data. They're all HIPAA compliant. We are using TerraNest, if you're familiar with that. I'm sure you are, in Salesforce, which is geared towards collecting the information for the counselors. There are mandated counseling by courts, and our counselors also do that. So obviously you'll ask what kind of problems they call us regarding almost 500 calls received just during, between 20 and 22. And it had to do with lost jobs, divorce, needed attorney assistance because of the divorce, lack of halal food. Afghan refugee family service, family were given non-halal food by non-Muslim friends, and they're unaware of the cultural sensitivities. A lot of these workshops now also geared towards providing the cultural sensitivities of these refugees to non-Muslims, as well as to Muslims. So a lot of that is being done. A lot of families calling from small homes with many people living in small apartments. They all had COVID. Parents had dementia and things like that. There were grandparents living with them, so they needed the counseling services, which we were providing for free virtually. And also there have been calls for counseling and religious guidance. Cases of undocumented parents who are stuck in the country. This was very common, actually, not only here, but when I was in the Middle East, it was a major problem that parents came for 1 month or tourists came for 1 month. They overstayed for a year. They were illegal. They could not leave the country. They didn't have the money. A lot of issues were happening, and we didn't have counselors in Qatar as well. We had a lot of issues with that there. Right before coming here, I was serving as a professor in Qatar, but overlooking all the student placement in different places, but we did not have enough students. So the initial issues obviously were loss of family member, unemployment, working from home, monitoring children's remote learning, women struggling with balancing mental health and taking care of their families at home, strained relationships and dealing with uncertainty was a big one actually in many places, and this is how they got all their family issues. Anxiety in children, and a lot of domestic violence cases, and of course, many well-to-do clients also came because of Muslim therapists is what they needed, cultural factors and religiosity, and they could only find them in places like ICNA Relief, where most of the counselors are Muslims, and they were also trained in, let's say, Islamic counseling. The list goes on, COVID isolation, et cetera, Some callers were living in their cars. Friends would call sometimes for a Muslim employee who passed away at work. This is a big one, counseling needed after natural disasters. And so ICNA Relief is always there whenever there's a natural disaster. And this is how actually you would see them in the media covered, because whenever there's a natural disaster, you know, the ICNA Relief truck, bus, people, van, help goes, and they actually are helped by the volunteers of ICNA Relief. So there have been many difficult cases coming to our counselors. And one of the very interesting one was, you know, after all this deinstitutionalization movement, these schizophrenic patients became homeless. And so what do? So they come to humanitarian agencies and Muslim patient actually. And actually after many sessions, within a year, actually, he was then able to open up his own small business, which is very encouraging. That there is just one story here, the other story there. There are many, many stories of refugees getting there, or domestic violence, clients getting their certifications, education, driver license, GED, public assistance, housing, while they were at the transition housing of ICNA Relief. Yeah, so much demand for Islamic counseling. And they just show up at the masjid seeking for imams, and there are also imams who are actually working for ICNA Relief, and they are also there to help. Some of the imams who are not at ICNA Relief, also they're having regular sessions, but refer difficult cases to the professionals. And one of the imam who is also an ICNA Relief employee was telling me that actually they would tell you, the clients will come, that please make dua for me or do some ruqya and things like that. So it's very interesting. And some of the imams actually who are also working for ICNA Relief, they actually conduct their seminars and workshops when teaming up with, let's say, a professional counselor, which is very, very healthy, I think, personally. So what are they doing in Islamic counseling? Because the things that they say is, of course, when you move away from your fitrah, then you have all these mental health issues. So moving away from the natural disposition and a lack of self-knowledge leads to all these anxieties and depression that people have. So, you know, this model that we have of the ruh, qalb, and nafs was mentioned in one of my earlier writings with Human Keshavarzi. We know that qalb is mentioned at least 132 times in the Quran. And so there's a lot of writing on that. I've got 3 minutes left probably. I'm going to skip that. Most of us know that actually that there is the biopsychosocial model, but for those who are expecting the Islamic counseling, only want to work on the spiritual model, so there has to be a combination of the holistic intervention. So one of the first things that when I started doing the workshops and counseling, what, why, and how, and came up with a policies and procedures manual, because many of these agencies and organizations that you see are humanitarian, they have great intentions, but they may not have a particular way and form of doing things in a very standardized, organized way. So I came up with a 30-page manual that is now with them on what to do, when, etc. And yeah, this booklet, which actually I posted on the conference app, of 20 pages of explaining in very basic and simple terms what mental illness is all about, and trying to sort of like break the silence and let the family members and the youth and the people know that let's get the help. And yeah, as I said, that all these different workshops and support groups on anxiety and depression, grief and loss, expression for teens, reentry issues, stress dealing with transition into post-corona, Road to Adulthood, run by our counselors in various states, a teaming up of one of our counselors with the imam on conversation on anger management, introducing mental health services, and on, let's say, from crisis to opportunity, understanding resiliency, and reflections on how we can navigate our mental health during crisis, along with question and answer sessions. So the Crescent Counseling Center, which is in Anaheim or Fullerton, is doing a great job as well, and on, coping with depression, families, let's say, standing together in resilience, etc. We have Dr. Salma. She does all these talks in Urdu that is also seen on anxiety, insomnia, self-confidence, especially during the COVID. Sabar app I was talking to the brother here about, we sponsored that, and it's actually a very good one, endorsed by all these famous people here in the US. Sheikh Umar says, I'm a student of ICNA Relief, alhamdulillah, and it goes on and on. And the main thing that is about the challenge that we are facing is the stigma and shortage of mental health professionals in Muslim communities. We have a lack of funding like everyone else. The pay is less also for the staff. They don't do it for the pay, they do it for a cause of staff turnover, lack of volunteers, technology deficits. Many elder workers are untrained. There's still a continuing need for diversity among counselors, hiring more and qualified counselors and be able to distinguish between certification and licensure is also an issue that many of the people don't know. And the lack of research on mental health, especially in Muslim humanitarian organizations. I've also listed some of the recommendations that I thought of. So my time's up, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you. That's my website with all my publications on Islamic psychology. So my interest is basically mental health, Islamic psychology. And if you have any questions, you can send me on ICNA Relief email or my own email. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay. So we're actually out of time. Our closing remarks has already begun, but our chat was popping with questions for the speaker, comments and questions.
So everybody on the Zoom and everybody here, if you guys have any question, please reach out to the presenters via Huwa app or email, and everything here is recorded and available on YouTube. So sorry for time constraints, but we have been getting messages that please come to the track A main hall. Closing remarks have begun. And you guys also, thank you so much for being here. And then we'll see you in track A. Okay, thank you everyone.